Hey guys, welcome back to the Surviving Siblings podcast. Today I have another surviving sibling with me. Her name is Diana Hunter. Diana, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I'm really excited to have you here too, but it's always bittersweet. Every single guest that comes on the show. But I am excited to tell your story for many, many reasons, Diana. You lost your brother, Tyler, back in 2010. But what's interesting about your story, I connect with everybody in different ways, but your brother was 27. So was mine. And your brother was an asthmatic. So I connect with that personally too. And it's just so interesting. Every episode, I connect with a sibling in different ways, different levels, even though we lose our siblings in different ways. So, Diana, tell us a little bit about you and Tyler and your family dynamic. Kind of take us back and tell us about that.
So we grew up, or at least part of my childhood, in Montana. And my three younger brothers, I'm the oldest. I have one brother that's 3 years younger than me. And then Tyler was 10 years younger. And then I have a brother 12 years younger. So they were all three born in Montana. And we left there when Tyler was about two. Mom and dad were married. They did not get divorced until, much later on. But so until the time of two, we lived in Montana. Tyler did not have any health issues, actually, at that time. We did not notice anything until we moved from Montana to California. Um, and he was two, and I think David was like 3 or 4 months old. And we made that drive down to California. And within days of getting there, Tyler had his first asthma attack, which was totally foreign to us. Like, we'd never seen anything like that. And he ended up in the hospital. Um, and this was way back in those days when they had like the bubbles. They kind of like put them in to help them breathe. And I remember he was only like two and a half, and he would call, and he called me Nana. Nana, come get me out of here. Get the keys to the car, come and get me, and get me out of here. And that was the start after that, where he started having more of the asthma attacks. We found out he was very allergic to peanuts. So he had a couple episodes with peanuts, and it just went from there. We also found out later that he was allergic to horses. So I don't know how the whole Montana thing would have gone had we stayed there, because we lived on a ranch. But that was the start of everything when we moved back to California with his allergies. And over the years, he had consistent problems with it, in and out of the emergency rooms. And it just became one of those things. Tyler always had his inhaler with him. He, always dealt with asthma, and he was the only one out of the four of us that had those issues. So growing up, being the four of us, me and my brother, that was 3 years younger than me, were quite a bit closer than the two younger ones, because there was such a difference there in the age. But I also remember those two younger boys, Tyler and David. I remember the day they came home from the hospital. So you kind of had, I don't want to say necessarily the mother, but in a way, more of a mother type relationship with them. So it was a little bit different. But the rest of our childhood was, normal sibling, little brother, um, you know, always wanted to be up in his sister's business and that kind of stuff. Um, and we still maintain a really good and close relationship even after I moved out of the home. I got married when I was 20. So I was worried about staying close to the two younger ones, but they ended up moving from California to Oregon. So they were close to me. And so we were able to maintain that close relationship. Now, when you look at the four of us, there's me and there's Tyler, and we definitely have the more vocal. Um, we're going to give you our opinions. People either love us or hate us, and we don't care. That's always kind of been the way we have been. And my other two brothers are more the quiet, reserved, won't give their opinion on a whole lot of things. So Tyler and I got along really well because we both have that same, outgoing, take us as we are attitude, not as, I guess, sensitive about things.
Yeah. Diana, I had no idea we had even more in common because I'm the oldest as well. So I connect with you and I know what it's like to have a significant age gap as well because there's like a clump of us. There's like the three of us. And then my youngest sister is 10 years younger than me. And you're right. It's a different relationship when you have that age gap. And there's so many beautiful things to it, but there's also those natural fears that come up, like you got married, you moved away, you go to college, or you go start a job, or and so you think, oh gosh, like they're still at home under parents' care. Like it's a totally different life experience. But it is interesting when you have similar personalities because I connect with that as well. My brother and I had very similar personalities. He was more extreme than I was with the outspoken, give your opinion. And I do find that my two other sisters, they're more alike. So again, one of four, I totally connect with that. It's interesting how the different personalities pop up, but um it's one of the reasons I'm on here telling your stories and my brother's story because he was just so extroverted and so opinionated and I am, but wow, he gave me a run for my money on that. So it's like I feel like this is a part of, a love letter in
Exactly.
honor to him. And I feel like that's why you're here too today.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's interesting to watch it. And as you have a bigger family, four's big these days. That's a bigger family. And there are different dynamics, but there are different things that you connect with. So I love that you and Tyler had that in common. And I think it's interesting though that all of these health things came up for him. And what was that like for him to, because I connect with this too, but what was that like to kind of grow up dealing with all of this? Was this just something he was accepted and it was something he was used to, or was this kind of a constant struggle for him?
He was used to it in the respect that he knew there was nothing he could do about it. Um, was he kind of disappointed and maybe kind of irritated that it limited some of the things that he could do? Definitely. Our family is a big military family. My dad was in the military. My grandfather, my brother spent 20 years in the military. Tyler would have loved to have gone in the military, but with the asthma, it was not something he could do. So there were a lot of things like that that he just felt it really limited, what he was able to do. When it came to sports, he loved playing golf. That was one thing he could do. Um, but it limited a lot of other things. He wasn't happy about the horse thing. He would have loved to have ride a horse. He learned to live with it, but he definitely wasn't happy with all of it. But he also accepted, this is what it is. So
Yeah, yeah, I can relate. I'm sure that would have been very difficult. I mean, also you guys living in Montana for a short time too. I love how you said, I don't know how that would have panned out. Yeah, it's like horse country for sure.
exactly, exactly. And he always wanted to go back to Montana, but he came anywhere near a horse and it was done. It was over. His eyes were swelling up and sneezing and it wasn't a good thing, but he would have loved Montana had we
Yeah,
stayed there.
yeah.
But it was a good thing we did end up moving for him and health wise. It ended up being better.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about you, like as he was 27 when he passed, but tell us a little bit about his life as an adult. So he's, in your dynamic and tell us what was going on after he left home. Tell us a little bit about what he was up to.
Okay, well, he had a complicated at 27, he was divorced. His ex-wife, Whitney, who I actually still consider my sister-in-law, is just amazing. And they ended up getting divorced right after she gave birth to my nephew, Jack. So he did have a son. One of the other things my brother struggled with, and that a lot of us, especially the siblings, did not realize how serious it was he was an alcoholic. And so it did affect him being able to hold a job, being able to provide for his son. It caused their divorce. So it caused a lot of issues. Um, in fact, just a year prior to his death, he had come out to Florida because I had moved to Florida prior to that. So he had come out here and he wanted to look into a golfing school in Orlando. Not that he would ever leave Oregon and leave Jack, but he wanted to come out here and do that. He was actually finally, for the first time, starting to get things together. He hadn't totally 100% given up drinking at that point, but things were getting there, and he was willing to make changes. You know, he had court cases pending, he had a DUI, but he also knew he had a son who was 4 years old at the time he'd come out here. Um, so he knew he needed to make changes so that he could be there and be the father that Jack deserved. Um, it is kind of interesting to me as you saw him make those changes in just the year before he passed away, because you want to see him change, you want to see him do good, and then everything starts to change, and then we ended up where we ended up. So he has struggled for a long time with being
Yeah.
an alcoholic. That was his way to deal with a lot of the family drama, the family issues. There was a lot of drama with us siblings, unfortunately. The time that Tyler passed away, me and Tyler were speaking. We had never not spoken. We had always maintained communication. But none of the other siblings were talking. Me and Tyler spoke, and then everybody else was just closed off to everybody. Um, the month prior to Tyler's asthma attack and him passing away, we had tried to fix things. And my last conversation actually with Tyler the month before he died, asked him, I said, you know, how am I supposed to fix things with my brother if he won't talk to me? And Tyler had told me, he said, don't worry about it. Let everybody calm down. I promise you this will all work out. And I thought, all right, wise one, because he always thought he was smarter than everybody else too. And actually, I think he probably was. But so we'd had our little go around for quite a while with the siblings, trying to figure out how to fix the relationship. And like I said, it had all come to a head about a month before he had passed away. So I guess we can get into how all that. The last time
Yeah.
I had talked to him was that conversation that we had about the sibling, you know,
And it's
situation.
Yeah, Diana, and I'm finding this so interesting because, well, first of all of you guys that listen, our siblings out there, supporters out there, a lot of people listen to the show, message me, talk about how the family dynamic shifts so much with the loss. So, of course, we're going to talk about what happened after. But a lot of people will relate to the fact that things were not perfect, right, in your family dynamic going into it. So, it's going to be quite interesting to discuss kind of what shifted afterwards and what happened for you. And personally, I connect with that as well. Things were not rosy perfect before, and they're not afterwards either. But what I think is so interesting about your conversation with Tyler is he almost had this kind of like, I don't know, call it sage advice, call it,
Yes.
insight. It's very, I mean, do you find that almost a little eerie when you look back on it? You're like, how did he kind of know things might shift? But isn't that, I mean, how do you feel when you kind of reflect back on that? I think that's interesting in your story already.
Yeah, a little mad at him sometimes
Yeah.
because one of the last text messages was him saying, "I promised everything will work out. Everything will be fine." And I'm just like, "How?" Like I don't see this working out. Um, because at the time, David, my youngest brother, was living with me in Florida, and him and Tyler didn't talk, and him and Grant didn't talk, and so like I just did not see things getting any better. Now, after seeing how everything happened, wow, you know, maybe he is smarter than everybody else, like he thinks he is, because he obviously knew something that we didn't. But
Which is fascinating, and I can understand that too, and that's why I wanted to ask you that because it's okay to have, and I think we both wish we would have known, it's okay to be angry at things, it's okay to be sad about things, it's okay to be like, "Oh my gosh, I wish I would have done this," or all of those emotions you didn't know this was gonna happen, right? And I do think that conversation is interesting. So that's an interesting dynamic that was happening too, Diana. So you had your youngest with you at your
yes,
your home. Wow. So it was Tyler even able to visit because they weren't connecting, right? So
Yeah, Tyler had visited the year prior, and David was not living with me yet. And we were kind of waiting to see if Tyler was going to come back out to Florida and live here. Well, when he decided, Tyler decided he didn't want to come to Florida, or at least right now, David was like, well, fine, I'm going. They both lived with my dad at the time, but weren't speaking. So it wasn't making things easy, for my
right.
dad either. So we had my youngest brother come out. So he was living with me at the time that everything happened, and his biggest regret, obviously, in this whole thing is that he did not fix things before Tyler had his fatal asthma attack, you know, and that's been hard on my other brother as well, that those things were not fixed prior.
Which again is something that I hear about all the time, and personally in my own family dynamic, and those of you who listen and are listening struggle with it all the time, right? It's, I wish I would have said this. What if I did this? Or what if I spoke? There's so many what ifs, and it's really difficult, especially with a sudden loss like yours. We just understand. We know that there's always those unanswered questions or what ifs. And so tell us a little bit about, so you've got this interesting family dynamic, and you're kind of like second mom there, Diana. Like,
Yeah.
like they're living with you, they're visiting you. I mean, it's like you really are wearing second mom hat, if not mom hat. I mean, that's the dynamic I'm getting from this.
Oh yeah, definitely. My brothers know I am there. I'll support them with it, anything they do, whatever they want to do. That's always been my relationship with them, and especially the two younger ones. So if Tyler wanted to come to Florida, come to Florida.
Right.
You can come live here. Yeah, that has always been that dynamic with them, and still is.
Yeah. And I can relate to that too. And so walk us through what happened with Tyler. So he is 27. I love that you have a beautiful relationship with his ex-wife. I think that's amazing. And again, we hear all the time from people that that's not what happens right after, especially after a loss too. And um, Tyler having a surviving child, it's really important. And so I'm so happy, and I can't wait to talk about that. That you there's light sometimes in the darkness, right? And
Yes,
I find that
definitely.
that's probably a little bit of light for you. So he's struggling. Oh, let me go back to this really quick, Diana, before we get into the actual day when this happened. But because again, so many of us have siblings or have personally struggled with alcoholism. I mean, it's so prevalent, right? And again, another thing I relate to, so many people listening, I'm sure, relate to this as well. But I find it interesting too in your story that Tyler really kind of hid this from you guys. Like, he seems like he was somewhat functioning. I know you mentioned that he got a DUI and that he struggled with a job, but it was surprising for you that he was struggling as much as he was.
Yeah, we just thought he was a jerk sometimes, and that was
Ye
just his personality.
Right.
So, w I didn't really connect that it was the alcohol all the time,
Mhm.
because he can have a very strong personality, and I think the time that I really, really picked up on it, was I believe my second husband and I had just gotten married, so I flew out to Oregon, so that my family could meet him, and Tyler comes in, and you could tell right off the bat he was drunk. And he started talking about how much he hates law enforcement. Well, my husband and I are in law enforcement. And I told my husband, I said, he's drunk. Just sit here, just listen, just take it. And that was probably the first time I really realized he's got a problem, because yeah, he can be a jerk sometimes, but this is a little bit much for him. And, my dad was like, he's been drinking. And being away for a few years and not seeing him on a daily basis, I did not realize how bad it had gotten until that visit.
And I think all of us who have someone in our lives who struggles with alcohol or drugs, right? We all know that moment when we're like, "Whoa," especially you made a great point when you step back for a little while and then you re-enter an environment in which they're using or they're struggling. It's like, "Whoa," 'cause your reference point is just so different because you've been away from
Right.
it.
Yep. That was my wake up to, okay, this is, worse than what I thought it was, you know.
Yeah. And then you mentioned too, Diana, that because of Jack and because of his life and the way it had been going, he was kind of getting back on the straight and narrow and getting like ship shaping, getting it back together. And then he has this asthma attack. So I'm with you. Like, it's heartbreaking. And I've had other stories where you know, siblings were hopeful. They felt like their sibling was getting right on the right track again. And then something happens. And so I'm curious to hear about this part of the story. So again, he's on the right track, getting his life back together. Jack's an inspiration for him. What happens?
Yeah, he was doing really good. And I remember talking to my mom like a few weeks prior that he was spending more time with Jack. You know, the alcoholism, he wouldn't make Jack his priority. Um, so he was making that a priority to be sober, to be around Jack. And I know everybody's got their opinions when it comes to marijuana, but he had even backed off of that. He was working with the court system. He was taking medication, the antabuse that they give them. So if they do drink, it makes them sick. But he
Right.
was participating in all of that. And he lived with my dad at the time, but the night before his asthma attack, he had Jack, and Jack was staying the night with him at my mom's house. So they were both there at my mom's house, and they'd, gone out to dinner and all of that. And my mom even said, like, he was just great with Jack. Um, wasn't drinking. It was just a kind of a different him. Like, my mom could see that things were starting to change with him. So it was kind of a shock the way, everything happened. So Tyler and Jack stayed the night at my mom's house. Not a big deal. Tyler got up really early, like about 6 o'clock in the morning, and my mom heard him get up and go to the bathroom. And a few minutes later, she heard him calling, "Hey, mom, I need you." So she goes to the bathroom, and he's like, "You need to call 911." And you could tell he was having a hard time breathing. He had his inhaler in his hand, but years of experience had taught him this just was not doing it. Um, so my mom, in order to get good cell phone service, especially for 911, she had to step outside of her apartment. So she stepped outside to make the phone call, and she could hear him hit the bathroom floor. So she knew he had passed out. And I went back and got all the medical records and everything because I had to know the timelines for everything. It did not take, EMS that long to get there, maybe, 6 or 7 minutes or something. And they get there, they get him out of the bathroom, and he was in cardiac arrest at that time. So they pull him out to the living room, and that's when they notice that Jack is still asleep on the couch. Or we thought he was asleep. We thought he was asleep for years. They had picked him up and moved him into my mom's room while they're starting CPR on my brother. It wasn't until many years later that we found out that Jack was not totally asleep, but he was only 5, so we don't know how much he really understood of what was going on, but he knew it wasn't good. He knew it was bad enough. He needed to pretend like he was asleep through the whole thing. Um, it took them about 20 minutes to get Tyler's heart going again, and then, transport him to the hospital. So this is all going on, in Oregon. And I'm here in Florida, getting up on a Sunday morning, go to church with the family. Uh, and we're sitting in church. I remember for some reason looked at my cell phone, and there must have been 10 missed calls from my mother. So I knew, okay, this isn't good. She doesn't call that often. And so I got up and I walked out and I called her. And, it's weird because it's still like that phone call is like yesterday when I think about it. And the first words out of her mouth were, "Tyler's not breathing." And I'm like, "What do you mean he's not breathing?" And she said, "We're at the hospital. He's been intubated. He's on life support. He had an asthma attack." I don't know that I remember a whole lot else after that because, my thing was go back in, get the kids, get the husband, well, we need to get out of church so I can figure out exactly what's going on here. Especially being that far away, my mom's upset, and trying to figure out details. And like church was not the place to try and sit and figure that out. So we end up going home. I'm able to talk to my brother who lives with me. And after that, things were kind of just crazy. It was multiple phone calls to the hospital and to my mom and to my dad, and nobody can give us definite answers. And I'm like, well, we're in Florida. Do we need to come to Oregon? Like, how serious is this? Me knowing full good and well, because I've worked in the medical field, that 20 minutes to get his heart going and is bad. I knew that, but you don't want to think the worst either. Um, so it's like, do we go? Do we stay? And they're like, well, we're doing a few things. Why don't you just wait and see how things play out? Plus, I was starting a new job the next day. So
Wow, Diana.
I'm
Oh
like,
my gosh.
okay.
Mhm.
I start my new job on Monday. They're going to run some more tests, brain function and different things like that. And midway through the day, though, we get a phone call, and I talk to the ICU nurses, and they're like, "If you're going to come, you need to come." So by Monday, 3 p.m., me and my brother are on a flight to Oregon. Um, we knew, and it was interesting because I was didn't have much time to pack, but I remember packing my funeral dress. I specifically, I'm going to probably need this, so bring it. Um, that was the one thing I made sure I had. And my brother, who's in the military, he was still in the military at the time, stationed in Kansas, did the same thing. He brought his dress uniform to wear at a funeral. And, because he had to get permission to do that ahead of time. And so he had gotten there not too long before we did. But we both had that in the back of our mind. Grant worked in medical in the military, so he knew where we were at, with it as well.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting from your story is like I think as siblings, like we have an intuition and kind of a gut feeling, and it sounds like you had that, Diana, but it also sounds like, you and Grant also have a medical history, right? Like you were picking up what they were putting down when they were
Yeah,
speaking to you on the phone, and you were like, I need to go ahead and prepare for this. But what a whirlwind in 24 hours, or, just over 24 hours, that you go from church to, and again, all of us on here can relate to the call. It's like one of the languages we all speak. We either made the call, received the call, or did both, right? And it's something you never forget. And you describe it so perfectly because right afterwards, it's like, what is even happening? And then there's these moments like you packing and packing your funeral dress that it's those moments we kind of pull out of the fog for a few minutes and we're like, okay, I have to do this. It's kind of like a survival thing, these particular moments that we remember.
yep, exactly. Yeah.
So what was it
So
like? So you guys flew there, you and your brothers flew there, and what happened next? Because you had this very high intuition that we know what was going to happen next, but what did happen next for you when you got there?
we got there late, late Monday night, and the first thing we did was go to the hospital, which just happened to be a hospital that I had worked at for 10 years. So I knew the hospital, I knew some of the people that worked there, and the fact that they were willing to let us into the ICU at midnight, I knew was a big thing. So, but we walk in there, me and my brother and David and my mom, and Grant was there with his wife Wendy. They were planning on staying the night, and all I remember was looking at Tyler and knowing he wasn't there. Yes, he physically was there, but I just did not feel my brother there. It was almost hard for me even to look at him, um, because I guess, people say they feel like they're kind of already gone. It was almost like that. And my mom was like, "Well, do you want to stay the night?" And I'm like, "No, mm-mm, I
Yeah.
can't. He's not here. I can't do this. And so we ended up going to my mom's house and, went back Tuesday morning after they had run all of their tests and everything. Um, so we were doing that whole wait for them to run their tests, and then we're going to sit down and then in a little family room with the doctor and figure out what our options are. And something kind of interesting in that whole thing, Grant and I weren't talking at the time. Didn't want anything to do with Grant. I just make him and his wife just stay away from me. I'm not here to
Mhm.
deal with them and their drama. Um, so I'd had nothing to say to Grant, and neither did David. We were all just so overwhelmed with what was going on at the time. So Tuesday morning, we sit down with a couple of the doctors in the room where they have the talk. Here's what you can expect from Tyler. He was not brain dead. He had brain activity, but they put it out there. He'll probably never walk, never talk, never feed himself. He'll need 24/7 care. And I remember they're just spitting out all of this stuff. And finally, when they stopped, I was the first one to say, he doesn't want that, because they're like, you have options. And I'm like, no, he doesn't want that. No, nobody said anything different. They all agreed. They all knew Tyler and knew him well enough that there was no way he would want to live however he was going to come out of this. Because I know a lot of people struggle with those decisions. And did you make the right decision? Did you not? And I can't say that I haven't ever second guessed it. I have, but I've also worked in medical long enough to know he would not have been happy how he would have come out, of things. So I think the fact that we were able to make a decision as as a family who's not even all talking to each other, with no fighting, no, we weren't split on anything. We knew what he wanted, made it a little bit easier. Not that it was an easy decision at all, but knowing at least we were all on the same page with that.
Like this part of your story, Diana, because again, we're talking about such a heavy topic, right? Loss of a sibling, loss of a brother, and you had really complicated family dynamics going on, and there were a lot of things you guys were not agreeing on, and we know that there's so many layers in
Yeah,
in a family, right? I'm one of 4 too, I get it, and but it is kind of a maybe a glimmer of light in such a dark thing when all of you guys agree. Like, I connect with that, and I also connect with what you're saying about, you know, you know, I'd be lying if I said I didn't second guess some things too, some decisions made, things like that. But the fact that all of you were able to come together about that particular thing, about, he wouldn't want to live like this, I think that probably helps you in knowing, like, okay, we all were in alignment with this. Even though we couldn't align on other things, it's probably helpful in the
exactly.
healing process. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, at least this we were on the
Right.
same page with.
Right.
We may have found plenty of other things to fight over after
Right.
that, but
Right.
that one thing, even my mom and dad felt very confident that, we made the right decision. We've
Yeah.
never, beat ourselves up over that. Um, but then the next part of that was, how do we tell Jack, um, his son? He's 5, but Jack has always been very advanced and very smart. When he started going to school, he did skip a couple grades. The kid is really smart.
Quick
So
as a
they
whip,
brought
that one.
he is, he absolutely is. So they brought him in and they brought in a hospital psychologist to explain what was going to happen. And he was asking what every machine did, why they couldn't fix him, why they couldn't use this machine for this. And it was, in a way, it was really cute watching him. He knew what was going to happen, but he wanted to make sure every option that was in his little mind was
Yeah.
explored. He was very definite about what he wanted to be there for and not be there for. He did not want to be there when we took him off life support, which totally understand that. I don't know that I wanted to be there necessarily for it, but um, it was just amazing watching this kid and the questions he asked, and thank goodness for the hospital psychologist to explain things, because I just sat in the corner and cried the whole time watching it. Um,
Right, right. I'm always blown away when I hear stories about, like, kids and there's not someone there to, like, help them through this, and so, like, what a little glimmer, right, in such a dark time that you did have someone so amazing to talk him through this, and, oh, that's heavy. Like, with kids, it's just really heavy, and I think it's I mean, he's wise beyond his years to know he didn't wanna be there during the life support
and he
removal.
still is.
Wow, cause he would be what? Not 18, 19 now?
18. He'll be
Yeah.
19 in September, and
Wow.
he is just he is wise beyond his years. He
Mhm.
he really is. I don't know where he got all that from, but he's the perfect combination of his mom and his dad.
I love that. I love that. Um, so tell us a little bit about so this obviously happens. Jack has the support of all of you too, I'm sure. And you guys decide to take him was it very quick? Like, taking him off life support, was this a quick decision? Did you give it a day or 2? What was that process like for you guys? Because for me, it felt very long and, like, also very short too. Sometimes people don't understand unless they go through it how that can feel because my brother, as most of you guys know, he was pretty much gone when he got into the hospital in some respects, but he was on life support. There was no coming back, but that is a definitive moment where you're like, "Oh my god, like, I'm walking away from the body," right? It doesn't feel like you're a person anymore, but you're walking away from the body. There's a finality to it, which I'm sure you connect with.
Right. Oh, absolutely. We had that meeting with the doctor on Tuesday morning, and none of us wanted to drag it on. And they explained, okay, so we can take him off life support. Well, how long is it going to, before he passes away? They said it could be a few minutes or it could be a few days. And we thought, oh my goodness. Okay. So, but our priority was Jack, first of all, not doing anything until he understood what was going on. And none of us wanted it to drag on, any longer than it needed to. I mean, I will admit I was a mess, an absolute mess. And I really knew things were getting to that finality when they let you go in and out of the ICU without stopping you anymore. They just saw our family coming towards the door and they just clicked it open. And being that that was a hospital I'd worked in, yeah, everybody knew. Everybody knew where it was going. And I didn't want to spend forever, in the ICU either. Um, my mom, and I don't know how my mom managed to do it actually, ended up getting me and Grant and David all in the hospital room with Tyler and just the three of us. And like I said, I'm not sure how she got us all three in there. And we all stood around his bed. Nobody really even said much of anything except for look at each other. And we decided right then and there, this whole fighting, this not talking to each other, it was all done. And I remember we hugged each other and things were good. Things were really good. And I can remember what Tyler said just a month prior, that I promise you everything's going to be okay. And I thought, you know what, you jerk, you didn't have to do this to get us back in the same room and make it okay. And I'm sure that's not what he was planning, but
Right.
you know how they, I don't know, things are like in the back of people's minds, or they subconsciously know something, or I don't know. But he was right. At that moment, everything was okay. Um, we didn't have any idea at the time how Tyler's death would emotionally impact all of us long term. But at that moment, Tyler was right. It was okay, and it was okay for a while. And at least when we walked out of that room, we were all talking to each other. Everything was good. Relationships were back in place. Unfortunately, it took that situation to do it, but you know,
Yeah.
he was right.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, like, the foreshadowing in your story is just really it's really wild, and you're not alone with this. It does happen, you're right. It's, like, sometimes in the back of people's minds and, like, they don't know why they're saying it, but they say it. It's interesting, and I there's a lot of us with these stories, and yours is quite remarkable that, you got here you were, all in the room with him, and you walked out unified in that moment, and that hadn't happened for you guys, and that's not the dynamic, so that's really interesting. Diana, I wanna ask you this, though, before we kind of move into the aftermath. So he again, we know Tyler struggled with asthma, since he was quite young too, was when this came on,
Mhm.
but what did the doctor say? Was there anything that could have prevented this? I mean, as someone who has asthma herself, not as bad as Tyler did, but you're right. We're trained. We've got our inhaler. We know when there's an issue, when we might need to go to the hospital, when we're not able to catch it. But this seems so fast and so sudden. What happened to him? So any insight from the doctors or the team that was caring for him? Um, Gosh, it just feels so quick. And it's again something, we
It
have
was.
not really talked about here on the show. And I'm glad to bring light to this.
Yeah, he had had asthma attacks in the past that have landed him in the emergency room. Never anything where he ended up on a ventilator. So of course, we're making sure, did the inhaler work right? Did it have medication in it? And after talking to the doctor, they said, unfortunately, there isn't any way to know when you're going to have one that just an inhaler is not going to cut it. Was there things that he should have been doing? Probably. Um, and it was a complicated situation of him being 27, not full time employed, didn't have medical insurance at the time. He should have been on some preventative medication, and he wasn't on it because he couldn't afford it, which, you know, mad at myself for not asking, mad at him for not asking me. I would have paid for it, but we also too did not, yeah, he'd had asthma his whole life. He uses inhaler, he's fine. And it wasn't until after all this happened that I, started looking things up, and it's like 3,500 people a year die from asthma attacks in the United States. Well, that's not really that many. Why did it have to be my brother? Like, what made that difference for him that day? Um, and it. My mom does remember when she had walked out to go make that phone call. She did hear him throw his inhaler across the bathroom. Um, and he said a not so nice word, which for him was kind of funny that that was his last word. But like, even he could tell something, and it was wintertime and it's Oregon and things are cold and wet. So we didn't have them do an autopsy. So is there a possibility he could have had, the starting of pneumonia or something like that that made it worse? Yeah, could have been. Um, you know, he was very allergic to peanuts, but there was also nothing like that kept in my mother's house because we knew, he can't even be around peanut oil. That not knowing, I know definitely made it harder for me. I wanted to blame doctors. I wanted to blame the healthcare system. Like, I wanted to blame somebody.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. How do you feel like you've moved forward? Because in almost 14 years, that's hard and that's so difficult for our siblings that listen to the show, and just if you lose someone in any relationship capacity, you like you said, you want to have someone to blame because like having we think mentally, but we know better now that we're further along in this journey, but we think that having someone to get angry at or place the blame on, like, I don't know why we think that's magically going to bring someone back, but it's like it's grief brain, right? We think that that's
right.
going to help us. But you're, again, 13, almost 14 years into your journey, Diana. How did you learn to kind of release that and release that, like, I've got to find this out, or, I got to find out that, I mean, because I connect with that. And so many of you guys I know connect with that too. And that's a hard part of the journey, I think. So I'm curious to hear how you processed that.
It definitely has been the worst. I am, and especially with my siblings, I want to fix everything. If there's something going on, I want to fix it. I want to take care of it. Um, so I unfortunately spent far too many years with this, trying to find somebody or something to blame it on. And I definitely went through every, you know, um, stage of grief, bargaining with God, you name it. Like, I went through it, and I went through it over and over and over again.
Mhm.
um, and it's not that Tyler is not even my first big loss in my life. When I was 19, I had a stillborn, almost full term, baby. I didn't think anything could be worse than that. And unfortunately, the situation with Tyler has been. And part of that, I didn't take time to grieve, I guess, the right way. I had to come back to Florida. I had to go to work. It was a stressful job that I had. I just, I cried on my way to work. I cried on my way home
Yeah.
and pushed down all the feelings. And then after about a year, things went bad with my brother again, which I think made my grief even harder. And what really made a big difference with me was finally around the time of COVID, when online therapy became a big thing. I did find a therapist that dealt with complicated grief, which I did not even know was a thing
Mhm.
until I started looking into it. The relationships with my brother, and then the breakdown of that again, and the loss of Tyler made mine just so more pronounced, um, to the point a year after Tyler had passed away, I broke down and lost it altogether. I ended up not working for 8 years. Um, I had my own. My thought was, if Tyler can't be here, I don't want to be here either.
Mhm.
And so, did I make some stupid choices there that landed me in the ICU? Yeah, I did. Um, it took a lot of therapy and having to learn to accept, and I know it sounds kind of cliche, but to accept the things I can't control, which is his death. I can't control that my brother does, and that relationship that I have or don't have with him. For me, it's been a lot of accepting of things that I can't change. And our family has a big issue with that. We're big control people. Not
Mhm.
only do we like to give our opinion, everyone should have the same opinion. And it's just taken a lot of me changing all of that to be able to accept what happened and to be able to deal better with it. I will never get over it. Um, but I deal better with it, and I am a different person. Overall has helped me. I don't know, if it's Tyler's intent to this whole thing, but I believe everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
And it may have taken a long time, but it got me to become more patient, more tolerant, more understanding. But I had to totally lose it all the way to the bottom
Yeah.
to be able to start fixing all of that.
Yeah. I think you're so brave for sharing this, Diana, and I'm so glad to have you here today talking about this, because I think it's also interesting that it was a year into your journey where it was just like you were rock bottom, because often, you may have heard me talk about this before, but a lot of people don't realize, and I always kind of flinch a little bit or go in with caution when I talk about this with people when they're early in their grief process, but the first year is really, it's tough, but it's such a fog and you're in such shock, and then you had so many things going on too, right? You weren't Your job was stressful, it was weighing on you, relationships, just so much going on. And then it's like when you enter the second year, everything begins to be a little bit too real, right? Because this kind of shock starts to wear off and you're kind of left with the aftermath. So it's not surprising to me. And you're just, now that I've been through this myself too, and those of you listening have as well, that it was at about a year when it was just like I lost it all, because for me it was a rock bottom moment for me too. It was There were some things going on with me too, and I just connect with you, and I was like, I have to get it together because it's
Yep.
like, you
Yep.
know, and I'm proud of you for taking care of yourself, and, I think, we need to release as much stigma around all of that as possible, but most people don't, give significant time off when you go through this type of loss. It just doesn't happen. We could list all of those things, so but I think it's really interesting that it was basically a decade into your journey when you really dug deep into the work with a therapist, and I think that's interesting too, and I think an interesting message because I don't think it's ever too early to start the grieving process, right? If you're feeling a loss, but it's never too late. I've had, folks come on this show and they're decades into their grief sometimes and they're like really peeling back the layers. And I think that's wonderful that you were seeing someone and was like, hey, this is complicated. Like, this is all the stuff you've gone through.
Yeah, exactly. I just kind of at that point thought maybe I'm just going to live like this the rest of my life feeling this way. Maybe this is what it's like to, to lose a sibling. And I'd had somebody tell me once that losing a sibling is different because you're losing your past, your present, and your future. And that really hit. That is very true. And I didn't plan on having to bury my two younger brothers, I never knew, but those 2, I did not expect to be, in that spot. It's just different. I They're your siblings are in so many different parts of your lives that to lose them, I didn't see a way forward. I didn't see a present, and all I had was my past, and I think a lot of it I was living in that a little bit, because I wanted to hold on to that. That first year, I would fly from Florida to Oregon for the weekend just to be
Wow.
closer to my mom, my dad, where he was buried, his friends. Oh my goodness, his friends, who I did not know the majority of them, have become some of my best friends. They have been there every step of the way. They have been amazing. Um, I mean, I probably would have moved back to Oregon just to be closer to anybody, that had that connection with him. That made for a rough year flying back and forth, but I kept doing it. And then
Yeah.
I needed to keep that connection with Jack. Um, he's not going to have his father. He's not going to remember a whole lot about him. I don't know what I was worried about. That boy has grown up to be an amazing human being.
Yeah.
And we're still close with his mom. Um, she, well, actually, my dad ended up moving 3 doors down from them, so Jack grew up to where he could walk to Grandpa's house. It's just
That's
some of it has turned out
beautiful.
so amazing,
Yeah.
um, in something that was so awful for all of us to deal with.
Yeah. And I think what's so amazing about your story, Diana, is that you share so openly and so honestly about how this is horrific. It was awful what happened. But over these past 13, plus years going on, it'll be 14 this year, there are some beautiful things in this. And I think what's so important about sharing stories like yours on this show is for people to understand that, of course, if we could get our sibling back, we would. But this is what has happened, and this is real, and this is reality. And so sometimes we just need to be open because even though this is difficult, and of course, we get them back if we could, there are things that happen, and life does carry on, and we will be able. And it is, I feel like it's our right to be able to heal as a human. And I feel like when we lose our sibling, and in our case is our brother, it's like we feel like we're not allowed to live a full life anymore. We're like you being stuck, kind of going back to Oregon. Like I can relate to that because it's like you don't want to let go of that. But it's an interesting thing happens because when we start to kind of live our lives in honor and bring them with forward with us, it kind of changes. It seems like that shifted for you pretty majorly during the pandemic when you started to kind of dive into your, because it is complicated grief. Your grief was not black and white at all.
Exactly. There was a lot of things that made it harder, to deal with, and I thought it was just me. I thought, there must be something wrong with me that is making it so hard. And yeah, it's sitting at home, pandemic, and time on my hands, and being able to do, video stuff. So they were, it was hard. You couldn't even find very many therapists that would deal with complicated grief. So I was able to actually find somebody out of state and be able to do that, that could explain how all of these other things were making it harder for me to heal, from the loss of Tyler.
Anything else that you wanna share with us, Diana, that you have not touched on? I was gonna ask you about Jack, but it sounds like Jack is doing great, so shout out to
Yes.
Jack, and also, I do wanna say too, I think it's really cool that your brother's friends became, um, your friends and also became kind of these confidants and supporters in this journey, and I've heard from other people too that that can be so helpful and healing because you guys can remember him together, bond over that. I think that's really beautiful, and I just again, it's one of those, gifts in the tragedy that, I think as we're on the healing journey, we start to appreciate, but when it's so fresh, it feels like nothing's a gift, everything's just whatever, right?
Exactly.
It's like, whatever. Yes. But now
And
you can sit
yeah.
here and appreciate all of this, and I think that's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Um,
looking back now, there are definitely good things that have come out of this, you know, and that's eventually everybody that's lost a sibling will get to that point. I never thought I would see a point where any of this had any good come out of it, but it has.
yeah, and people tell me all the time too, they're like, I'm never gonna get over this, I'm always gonna be miserable, I'm always gonna be, fill in the blank, right? Depressed, I'm always gonna be, and I'm like, I tell them just like you said so perfectly, Diana. Nope, you're not gonna get over it, but you're gonna laugh again, you're gonna smile again. Just keep at it, keep putting one foot in front of the other, and surround yourself with people who understand this because it becomes much more connecting when people and like you did too, people who know your loved one who passed, right? And here we talk about siblings, but I think that's so healing, and I wish somebody had told me to do that because it's helpful. It really
Yeah,
is.
agreed.
Diana, what else would you like to add before we close out and talk about where people can connect with you and share a little bit about the wonderful nonprofit that supports this episode and you, of course, too?
Well, and I am excited definitely about the nonprofit that I found. I will say another part of all of this with Tyler that after he passed away, for about 5 or 6 years afterwards, we had a nonprofit that we did for Tyler, the Tyler Pratt Asthma Foundation. And we've kind of let that go, but that was definitely something that was a big deal for us. And so he was a Harley Davidson mechanic, loved motorcycles. In fact, my mom hates it because I helped him buy his first motorcycle, but it got him hooked on them. So we did motorcycle rides in Oregon once a year and donated, the money to actually it's really cute. It was called Camp Huff and Puff in Montana, and it was so kids with asthma could go do all these outdoor things, and they had medical staff there for them, and all of this kind of stuff. COVID kind of ruined all of that, but that was something that we did. And I will say, as hard sometimes as it was to have those every year, it was also a really positive thing to see everybody come together for him and donate to something like that. Um, so those type of things I think are really good to be involved in, and it does help. It absolutely does help to see that their passing had some kind of effect on people afterwards because we would get these cute cards from all the kids that went to the camp that we sponsored, and so things like that have been amazing.
It's just so helpful. And you're right. Sometimes it can be hard because it's a memory and a reminder that they're not here. But there's so much beauty in that, right? Because like your help, like in the other side of it, it's almost like this overwhelming feeling like, okay, yes, my brother passed away and this was awful, but like look at this experience we're creating. And that's so cool. I love that you guys did that. That's amazing. Oh my God, I love it. Diana, tell us where we can connect with you because again, there's folks out there that are going to connect with your story, your family dynamics, the asthma aspect, so many different being a second mom to your siblings. Trust me, there's a lot of us out here. Tell us where they can connect with you, where you're comfortable.
Um, Probably either TikTok or Instagram. I did get rid of my Facebook a couple of years ago because that caused more family drama than anything else. But I am on TikTok a lot and I am on Instagram. So either one of those places.
Okay, perfect. And we'll put it in the show notes too, but what is your handle on both? Diana?
On TikTok, it's Diana, Diana underscore Lynn, Lynne.
Perfect.
And honestly, Instagram, I'm not sure.
That's okay. We'll put it in the show
Yeah.
notes for you. Yeah, we'll put it
Okay.
in the show notes. Perfect. So
I'm
it
not
sounds
on
like
there as
you're
much.
perfect. So you're a TikToker. So reach out to Diana on TikTok.
Yeah.
And Diana, thank you for sharing your story and Tyler's story with us today. It's just, again, so many parallels with every sibling that comes on. But the 27 Club thing, totally connect with it. And I just appreciate your vulnerability and this journey that you've been on.
Well, thank you for having me and thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
I don't think people realize the difference in the grief. And it
Yeah.
was so refreshing to run across this, that it was focused just on siblings. So
Thank
I
you so
appreciate
much, Diana.
everything you do.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you, Diana. And thank you guys so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast.